I already informed you that I am coming to Dubai and Abu Dhabi in the first week of October. Our meeting in Abu Dhabi is on the 5th of October. Those desires of meeting me in Abu Dhabi on 5th of October may contact the WhatsApp number and the email ID given below. In case you have not already done so, kindly do so at the earliest. There are limited seats.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Be Rich. It's me, Vinod. I'm sitting and recording remotely with Shashwat, who's also remote. And since a lot of you have been asking us to catch up with Shashwat, and especially since the Howard Marks letter came out, people have been asking Shashwat to talk about that and get his views on that. So I thought since I managed to catch him sitting free for a moment, that I'll quickly record this, though I'm also outside the studio. So without wasting any further time, so, Shashwat, what is this all about? Howard Marks' letter.
So, first of all, it's good to be back on the channel after a while. And today, like you said, we thought we'd record about Howard Marks's memo. And for those of you who aren't aware of what his memos are, they're basically notes which he writes for the public, the general consumption of the public, and he puts it out on his website, oaktreecapital.com, and it's basically a summing up of what Howard Marks is thinking at that time at which he's writing. So it's probably something which encompasses everything he's taking in that moment and what he believes is relevant in terms of how his conceptual clarity works in that particular moment. So, for example, he took on the example of companies with debt. His Howard Marks's memo on debt, because he was looking at small cap companies in the US with debt and looking at the impact of interest rates. And during this period, he wanted to know how companies which were indebted would be affected by the interest rate cycles and exactly on which end of the risk spectrum you want to be when you're investing. That was one memo. Another memo was basically comparing less losers or more winners. What should be your strategy? There are different things which he wants to talk about. But today, he's talking about laws of economics. This is something which concerns me because I pursuing an education in economics, and he says, given what's going on in the world right now, with politicians saying that this economic principle is flawed, or I'm going to bring in this economic policy without much concern for whether it's relevant or not, whether it's feasible or not, Howard Marks figured that he'd write this memo for all of us. So in the memo, he rhetorically poses the question, should we just repeal the laws of economics? Because in common parlance, it doesn't seem to hold any relevance anymore with both candidates. And he's talking about it in the sense of the US, where he says that both candidates have lost touch in terms of what economic principles are sound and what they dictate and the promises they have made thus far and they're going to make in the future. He said that there is no match between those two worlds. So he says that there is one concept known as political reality. He says this is an oxymoron, which basically means that reality and politics can't be put together. So politicians are free to make as many promises as they want. They can promise that they're going to give every person in their country $1 billion. This is a promise which they can make. Whether we believe it or not, that's up to us. But the politician can go ahead and make the promise tomorrow or even today that I'm going to give away $1 billion to every person who votes for me. That can be a promise they make. It's up to us as to whether we want to believe in that or not. And there is another reality known as economic reality, which is something grounded in how we go about our daily lives. There's only so much money in the coffers of the government, there's only so much money in our wallet. There are so many expenditures which we have every day, and it's not very easy for this reality which we live in to be molded in the way our imagination works. So when Kamala Harris, Donald Trump, or even our politicians, or whichever country you live in, your politicians, the way they make promises, it need not, and in most cases does not mesh well with the reality of our situation. So, for example, he takes the example of Donald Trump. He says Donald Trump has been talking about tariffs on China as well as other imports into the US, a general tariff to basically promote homegrown industries. This sounds wonderful, especially if you are someone in the US in one of the industries which is now being outcompeted by the industries abroad. And if you're in one of these industries, you must be cheering for Donald Trump, saying that, yes, bring back jobs in America. Let's get tariffs on these people who are subsidizing their industries and pushing cheap products onto us. It should be us making these products, and we'll get the income now. Yes, this is wonderful as an idea. But Howard Marks says that, what are the costs? Yes, you have a benefit of having more jobs in a particular industry. Even let's say your GDP does end up going up, maybe. But Howard Marks asks you, what is the cost? He says the cost is, if you are now trying to consume products which would otherwise be cheap for importing. Suppose even your car, if you're trying to purchase a car in America, which is a necessity for those of our audience members who are living in America, having even a second-hand car makes a lot of sense because it's not a very pedestrian-friendly city. So having a car or a scooter makes a lot of sense in America. And if you want to buy a car now, like let's say you're buying a Ford car because it's the classic car. If you're buying a Ford car or a Toyota, where do you think the raw materials for this car are coming from? Do you think that the metal is being sourced in America? Not so. If you're buying a Tesla, do you think that Tesla's lithium content is for the batteries are being sourced in America? I don't think so. And even intermediary parts are being manufactured elsewhere, and it's at most being assembled in America. And there's a reason for this. It's called efficient allocation of capital. Whatever America is good at doing, America is going to do that and export that. And whatever, let's say, India or China is better at doing, they're going to produce that and export it out into the world. And now if Donald Trump comes in and says, I don't care what we're good at, we are going to do everything ourselves, then there's clearly an economic cost. Like suppose my uncle and I are sitting in a room. He is better at thinking and conceptual tasks, and maybe I'm better at handiwork. For example, I'm good at, let's say, making sure the paper moves through the office and gets to a certain point, or I'm good at networking, and I'm good at physical work. And my uncle is better at top level stuff where he's actually conceptually thinking up stuff. Then I would rather let him handle that, and I would handle the physical work to be done. And we basically split up the work in a way where we do things which we're good at, and at the end of the day we work together well, and we have much more produced than what we would have produced otherwise. For example, there's this concept known as competitive advantage, where you would much rather have Vietnam producing shoes, for example, rather than producing chips or designing chips, because you have the intellectual capacity needed for that in America with MIT graduates or Harvard graduates. You basically have an advantage in a certain place which they could be using. Donald Trump is now saying, I'm going to put a tariff and I'm going to basically blockade our imports and make sure that we are encouraging our own homegrown industries, which basically means inflation is going to rise. And it also means that in the future, this inflation is going to percolate to the bottom layer. So if you're going to buy even petrol, for example, what is preventing the opposite country from putting their own tariffs onto you? If I am going to be aggressive in the negotiation table and I come to the negotiation table and say, look, any goods which you bring into my country, you need to pay a tariff for it. What is preventing you from saying, okay, whatever goods you give me, you're going to have a tariff as well? So if I want to export now, at best, it's a zero sum game where neither of us make anything. At worst, we end up reducing the total level of economic output. So this is something Howard Marks says Donald Trump doesn't understand. When he talks about Kamala Harris, he says that Kamala Harris may have good intentions. Yes, grocery prices are too high. More families should be able to afford what they're purchasing for daily use. Fine and dandy. This principle is fine. Even Donald Trump's principle of wanting to create more homegrown jobs is fine. But how is Kamala Harris planning this implementation? Howard Marks says she's planning this implementation by putting a price ceiling. So she's basically artificially going to stop the price from going up without actually affecting supply. She's not pushing up the supply of groceries. She's not building new factories or building greater capacity to produce more groceries. She's merely saying that you can't sell above this point. If both my uncle and I are in the market to buy a carton of milk, and let's say there's only one carton of milk, Kamala Harris saying that I'm going to put the price ceiling on milk to $10, and anything more than $10 it can't be sold for. Suppose my uncle has $11, I have $10 exactly. Normally you would allow a producer to sell it to the person who has more money, because that's how demand and supply works. But now you're telling me that the shopkeeper or the shop owner is not allowed to make that margin and not allowed to differentiate amongst price because there's this arbitrary line, and that doesn't mean I'm any happier or he's any happier. If he gets it for $10 when he could have paid $11, of course he's happier. But in a whole, I'm still unhappy. The shopkeeper is unhappy. So did we achieve something better than where we were before? That's the question. In the case before, if the shopkeeper was allowed to push the price to $11, my uncle would have been happy and the shopkeeper would have been happy. Yes, I would have been unhappy maybe, but you still have a better socially optimum outcome. And when the shopkeeper knows that milk is selling for a lot of money, he's going to go and produce more milk or buy more milk to supply into the market because more people seem to want this milk. So, this is how price incentive mechanisms work in an economy. When the price of something goes up a lot, that basically incentivizes producers to go to that field and produce more of that and maybe even make it cheaper. And in the long run, what you'll end up seeing is that prices will come down possibly, and it could mean that I could probably purchase milk at $8 per se because more people are now trying to figure out how to produce more milk cheaply. So, what Howard Marks is trying to say here is that regardless of whether you're in the camp of Donald Trump or you're in the camp of Kamala Harris, whether you're in the camp of BJP, Congress, or even any other party anywhere in the world, it doesn't matter. Politicians have an incentive to dream up and drum up any scenarios they wish to drum up. The point here is that their reality or their sense of reality has nothing to do or very little to do with economic reality. So that's basically the point of the memo. So, what are your thoughts on this idea of the difference between political and economic?
He's absolutely right. But there are some tough realities as an economist you have to deal with. One, the reason why this Donald Trump's facing this problem is historically there's always been a disparity in wages across the globe. So because of this disparity in wages, it is always someone is willing to work cheaper somewhere because you have multiple currencies. So inflation is not even because of currency variation. Things wages are not even. So you can't fix this. No matter any way you shake it, you can't fix it. Second thing, when it comes to Kamala Harris trying to put a ceiling on it, is the same reason why my brother says sugar companies in India, cement companies in India, we should stay away from because it's all controlled. The prices are all controlled by the government. Whenever there's some election cycle and we need to do this, we get inside and the government starts tinkering with it. So these companies will always perpetually be servants to the government. They are not freely allowed to make profit. So as an investor, you tend to lose in that business. His idea behind that, and which is also true. And the third thing is what you were talking about is basically this whole supply demand and everything. It's all true, but the problem is the human population has become so big. The resources are finite. We don't have infinite resources. Our capacities are finite, but our demand has become so much bigger than what we can currently do to meet this demand in the population. So looking at this, yes, what would only work is having an open and free market where everybody can produce things and everyone's allowed to ship to each other's market. No point slapping tariff. What will happen is for initial few decades, there'll be a lot of imbalance. There'll be a lot of push and shove. There'll be a lot of disparity from one region to another, but slowly things will settle down. But during those 10, 20 years, it'll be terrible times for the whole globe as a whole because you'll have real disparities in this for it to finally settle down because it's like throwing a stone into the water. Huge ripples will create. So society doesn't like this. That's why politicians are not sitting in one evil room, sitting and coming up with these ideas. The problem is the political reality is not what the politician makes. It is what the people are demanding. When Hugo Chavez came to Venezuela and he came out with these cuckoo ideas for their policy, people voted him in and he was considered a god. And he ruined the economy. He ruined their petrol economy. It was a country which was spewing cash. They had one of the world's largest oil reserves. You could never have imagined being a Venezuelan 40 years back that your country would be like this. It was just purely because people felt, whatever reason, Venezuelans as a population as a whole felt disenfranchised with the ruling class and voted this guy in. And he made some real crazy economic plans because the population wanted it. And he was very popular for it. And he was very popular even after he died. That's why his stooge got elected and voted in. But finally it unravels. Like Howard Marks says, these things cannot be sustained because you can't keep giving everybody $1 billion. Then your currency becomes debased because everyone has $1 billion. So everyone can afford to buy an iPhone for $1 billion. So where will it go? So that's what happened in Venezuela. So if you look at it, yes, I agree with everything he says. But what solution is he offering?
So part of the solution he offers is basically that first of all we need to understand that there are things which are possible and there are things which are clearly and very, in a sort of hard and fast rule that's out of the realm of possibilities. So he says that look, we want our wages to go up, but we want prices to be where they are, or even better, we want it to go down. So we say that we want to be paid more and we want the prices to go down. Then you're basically talking about a scenario where it's impossible, because if your wages go up, that basically means the cost of input into producing something also goes up. So you have to temper your expectations into what is even possible. And he puts forth the argument that free markets are probably the best way to maximize economic output. And this is something which he does back with economic concepts, because the first thing we study, so for those of you who are not familiar with economics as a discipline, the first thing we study is that free markets is the most efficient system out there, provided that it works as it's intended to. Yes, then there are theories where you say that look, the free market doesn't always work, there are inefficiencies, there are externalities. For example, if my uncle is producing a car and I'm buying the car from him, then he charges me a price, I pay him that price, and I use the car. But then what about the smoke which his factory is putting out into the air? And what if there's a neighborhood which lives next to his factory and they're breathing in that air and it's reducing their property value? Then shouldn't that cost be sort of paid by both me and my uncle at some share? Those are questions which free market theory doesn't really answer very well. But in general, it does have the right idea, because with free markets, let's view Donald Trump and Kamala Harris through the lens of free market. So if you view their policies through the lens of free market, it immediately makes sense to actually remove what tariffs you have, apart from, let's say, only protecting the industries which are very crucial to your statehood. For example, there are industries like defense, healthcare, and maybe even basic food security. Off the top of my mind, these are the only things which I think really matter and need to be, independent of the world, because this is the crux of your statehood. But apart from these things, apart from police enforcement, that is law enforcement, defense, and let's say even food security, apart from these factors, and let's say energy security, apart from these factors, it doesn't make much sense to say that, I need all these industries to be done only by me. You could specialize in certain things, whatever your population is good at doing, and you let everyone else do what they're good at, and you exchange goods, because then you maximize the amount of goods there are, and more people get more things, and every person is able to consume more than they would have otherwise. And in the lens of Kamala Harris, if she really is intent on bringing grocery prices down, first of all, she needs to figure out why grocery prices went up. And they went up because during 2020, no one could go out. No one could go out, and their service expenditure went down, and their grocery expenditure went up, as Howard Marks argues. He says that when you basically can't spend on tourism, anything else, then you're going to go and purchase goods alone, because even services like movies, you can't watch movies. And the only service you could probably purchase was streaming services. But if you look at food inflation in the recent few months, it hasn't been as bad as it was in 2021, especially when there was pent up demand and all those characteristics. And secondly, labor in the US has enjoyed quite a bit of dividends post COVID, because a lot of people were being incentivized to come back to work for a lot of money. I remember reading articles about how there was people weren't willing to go back to work, which meant that employers had to pay a huge sum of money to attract people to fill up job openings. And this was a big deal post COVID. So what Howard Marks says is, one, is Kamala Harris even on the right track about grocery prices being too high? If she is on the right track about grocery prices being too high, then if she needs to figure out whether it's important enough for the government to step in and sort of subsidize groceries, And this could be by giving people more money, but then that would just mean higher inflation and maybe pushing the prices of these things up. It's a delicate balance. And unless you're affecting something which is going to push up grocery supply in the long term, or bring down demand of groceries in the long run, you're basically not going to solve this problem. And a temporary price ceiling doesn't help, because if you let the free market go as it is, higher food prices theoretically should mean that more people want to produce food because they can cash in on these higher prices. So Howard Marks basically says, let the market do what it knows to do best. Don't think that you are better than the market and you know better than the market. And where there are places where the government needs to step in, the government can step in there. For example, providing basic food security and healthcare and education for the population. These are things which could be an admirable policy measure. But apart from that, Howard Marks says that on stuff like tariffs and stuff like prices, let the market do its thing. That's his solution.
Well, my only issue is yes, economics, what you were saying is fantastic, but it doesn't work for the simple reason we are human beings. The same reason why democracy is the best form of government, but doesn't work because sometimes the majority is wrong. It can happen. In an election, yes, the majority voted it in. It happened in Germany after World War II. Majority of Germans voted Hitler in. People forget this, that Hitler was given power. He was like, here,
Yeah.
the German said, please rule us. It wasn't like he went and grabbed the power. He just spoke so eloquently and he charmed the Germans and they said, yes, we need this. So that's the same problem with free market economy, whatever you're saying. Yes, it is in theory very true, very useful. What you're saying is very true. But in practice, it is impossible to allow it to freely float for the simple reason human beings cannot take the punches on the face. Because as in democracy, you have to accept a system as majority rules. You have to accept that fact. And then if all human beings accept that fact, then democracy is perfect. Same thing with free economy. If everybody accepts the fact, whoever gives the right product, the market decides the price, market decides who should be producing it, the market decides everything, then free market works. Because yes, then if you don't have enough onions in your place, that's because you guys are not willing to pay more for it, or because of whatever reason. Or if as a farmer, you're not getting great value for your corn, that's because you guys are making too much corn, or you're in a place which doesn't need corn, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But you will have to face that harsh reality and, move yourself according to that. But human beings don't want to do that.
Yes.
Human beings, at a time when we became domesticated from being nomadic and we started creating civilization the way we know it, cities and villages, we started compromising, saying, okay, for the greater good, we have to do certain things. We have to tinker with it. Yes, he's right. Howard Marks, yes, in theory, it's very true. But in practice, I don't see any of what he says is possible.
I would disagree with you, because the reason, I mean, look at China or India. For example, China is a country which is predicated on the argument that, look, we know what's best. There's this sort of paternalistic angle to which China operates, which is that, or not operates, but at least their motto is quite paternalistic, where we serve the people by doing what's best for them. We know what's best for them. And they took a sort of communist angle to it, where they said that, we're going to follow a pattern where we're looking at social welfare for all. And even China was forced basically to shift towards a capitalistic pattern in order to bring the crazy amounts of increases in individual consumption that they did. If the average Chinese man from the 1980s to now, if you look at the difference in consumption per Chinese person, it's remarkable what the acceptance of capitalistic principles have done. Until very recently, when there's been a distrust of tech companies in China, and they forced certain tech companies to delist from the US. Let's not get into that. But my point is, yeah.
Yeah, let me interject. Let's rewind the clock a little bit.
Yeah.
China did not embrace capitalism. It was Nixon and Kissinger who wanted American capitalists were looking for better places, cheaper labor, because American workers were demanding too much. So rubbing their palms, went to China and said, listen, we have so many people. They're all living in villages. Why don't we put some factories here? They can earn a little more.
Yeah.
And then you guys will have some money. we get cheaper products, we can make more money. Forget those factory workers in the US. They agreed on this. The problem was China allowed that if they had completely opened up. That's what US was hoping for. That China will enjoy the initial wave of cheap labor, cheap factory. But then when China opens and becomes fully capitalist, the next set of population, the next generation will demand higher wages, will demand higher everything, and inflation will catch up. And this imbalance between cheap labor in China and expensive labor in the US, that arbitrage will go down. So America is hoping for that. They tried to encourage China to become more and more democratic. But the Chinese said, they artificially have kept their wages down. It's not that the Chinese people want to be paid less. They're being paid in a currency which has no value. They got two currencies, you know how it works. So internally, they have their own monopoly money. Outside for the world, they have one money and they control everything and they're keeping it artificially cheap, the labor compared to the world, when really inside China, it's not. And that is what's confounding their problems worse. Now, that's why now the latest stimulus project by Chinese government is basically what they should have done slowly in bits and pieces 20 years back. They're trying to inject it very fast now. Their stock market has rebounded in the last 1 week, gone up by 15% because the government is saying, okay, we'll print free cash.
Yeah.
So I agree with what you're saying, but the system is not perfect because of the simple reason humans keep tinkering with this. Humans cannot stop tinkering because there are imbalances and humans want to step inside and fix the imbalances now. What Howard Marks says will work if human beings are not allowed to tinker and the imbalances naturally oscillate and they come to their own equilibrium.
Yeah,
But I
but
don't think we have the capacity to hold that pain.
the only thing which I just want to say one more thing to complete the China point, which I wanted to bring up. I completely agree with you. I don't disagree where this impetus came from, which pushed China into more of a capitalistic sphere. I'm not saying they're capitalistic. I'm saying that they moved towards that sphere from the sphere which they were embracing before. So what I was trying to say was that regardless of where this impetus came from, let's say it came from the US for the sake of this conversation. Let's say that the US started this. Still, China accepted that proposition and they were better off for it. I would argue that they were better off for it because look at China in the 80s and look at China today. China is the second largest economy in the world. It's a dominant force. What the USSR did for, let's say, a couple of centuries in terms of the sheer dominance of the Eastern sphere is what China is now doing. They have the Belt and Road. Let's not argue about whether the Belt and Road Initiative even exerts any influence. There are so many problems. But my point is that China was in the position to even think about exerting that kind of dominance today because of the fact that they accepted the wager with the US. And both the US as well as China were better off for it, I would argue, because look at US consumption for so many years has been subsidized by cheaper wages in China. And China was pretty much stagnant post colonialism before they got into the trade arrangement with the Western world. And today, China is not stagnant. No one would call China stagnant anymore. But if you look at literature in the 80s and the 70s, China was a stagnant country. In fact, we were considered to be a country which was on a better trajectory than China because we embraced Western ideals through our parliament and so on. I'm not going to get into that either. But my point here is that Howard Marks is right in the sense that if China is doing well today, it's because they accepted to do something which they had a talent in or a skill in, and they were willing to accept something else from the US in return. And what they've done with that money is again something which is not pertinent to this discussion. But Howard Marks says that free markets basically allowed China to consume at the level it's consuming today, and the American consumer to have consumed for so long at the rate which they were. And if let's do an alternate history experiment. Let's minus China from the world map post World War II. The US would not have been able to consume as much as it did in the past 30 years if that wasn't so, because of the fact that their inflation rate was artificially extremely low, much lower than it should have been, because they were getting cheap goods from, let's say, China and now Vietnam, Bangladesh, and so on and so forth. So that's the only thing which Howard Marks is talking about, where if you truly want to get to a place where you're better than what you were before for both parties involved, then the free market is the way to go. I have my reservations for it because of externalities. No one understands that the environment is the ultimate subsidizer for most of what we consume today. For example, if what we're consuming in terms of our energy, in terms of our cars, in terms of our goods and services, the environment is the one which is finally subsidizing everything, and the costs aren't being brunt as it should be, because the environment doesn't exactly have a voice in this discussion. For example, I can go onto the streets and complain that, look, my property is getting thrown in the trash pretty much because of how a factory has come nearby my property. But the environment, let's say a river can't go to court, someone has to represent the river in the court, and what's the incentive for that person unless they're a nature lover? So the point here is that bar the environment, the free market tends to work its magic quite well, is what Howard Marks argues. Yeah.
Anyway, I think this is a very interesting discussions, and I've opened up the comments down below. Please let us know what you think of what Shashwat said and what I said. I'm older, so I'm more pragmatic. Shashwat is younger, and he's a bit of a visionary on this when it comes. So I accept there are different views to this discussion. And I would love to know what the audience thinks about what we said. So do feed us the comments down below. I would really love to have a look at it. Thanks, Shashwat, for joining us today. I know I pulled you out of a busy day for you. We'll try and catch Shashwat again soon when another topic comes in. And I'm sure he's going to start his Substack soon. And you guys can start following him Substack too. Right, Shashwat? Substack starting soon?
Yeah. Sorry for the hiatus. I've been having a quite busy schedule, but once, in a matter of few days, we will get back working on the Substack, and we'll make sure that you get quality articles every month. Maybe it won't be on a weekly basis, but it'll definitely be a few articles per month where all of you get to read what we're thinking about, like how we have the honor and privilege of reading what Howard Marks puts out. Hopefully we can do something similar for our audience with an Indian perspective in mind as well. So yeah, so that's there. And also thank you for having me on after so long. It feels good to be back.
Great. So do subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notification, do share this with your friends and family, whomsoever you think would share this and like this content. And me and Shashwat wish you a wonderful week ahead, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey guys, welcome back to Be Rich. Before we get into the video, I wanted to bring to your notice that my uncles VinodSrinivasan, Anand Srinivasan and I have rolled out our Substack, which is basically a blog/newsletter where we're going to post our original research onto it. And we've analyzed macroeconomic trends. And a lot of you know my uncle Anand Srinivasan and I regularly write for The Hindu, and these articles are also going to be made available for you in the Substack. The link is moatinvesting.substack.com. You'll find it in the description and in the video right now. We hope you go check it out. We've put a lot of time and effort into it. And please give us comments and feedback on what you read. Thank you.
It's a great privilege and honor that so many of you in thousands have subscribed to my channel and have supported me. I have written 2 books in English, The Alchemy of Money and Ordinary Stocks, Extraordinary Profits. These books are published by us and are ready. If you want to procure a copy, send us a message to the WhatsApp number given below and my team would respond to you. If you want an Amazon Kindle copy, you can click the link below. Finally, those who wish to consult with me can send a mail to berichenglish@gmail.com. Once again, I thank you for your support. If you like this video, press the subscribe button of my channel, hit the like button and turn on the bell notification.